Good evening and welcome to the Oxford Martin School. Welcome to this evening's lecture. You're all here because we know that the robots are coming. What we don't know is who they're going to be working for. Will they be working on behalf of wider society or a small club of the super rich? Tonight's speaker is eminently qualified to guide us through this pressing issue. Jerry Kaplan is widely known in the computer industry as a serial entrepreneur, an inventor, scientist, and author. As an entrepreneur, he's co-founded several ventures in the field of social games, online auctions, tablet computers. As an inventor, he is listed as the co-inventor of numerous products, including the Synergy, the first all-digital keyboard instrument used for the soundtrack of the movie Tron, the Lotus Agenda, first personal information manager, PenPoint, tablet operating system used in the first smartphone, the Go computer, first tablet computer, and Straight Talk, the first natural language query system. As an academic, he's currently a fellow at the Center for Legal Informatics at Stanford, and he also teaches ethics and the impact of artificial intelligence in Stanford's computer science department. As an author, he wrote Startup, a Silicon Valley Adventure, which was listed by Businessweek as one of the top 10 business books, and he is author of the new Humans Need Not Apply, a guide to wealth and work in the age of artificial intelligence, and that is the title of tonight's talk, and he will be taking us through many of the arguments in this book. So Jerry's going to be talking. There will be plenty of time afterwards for Q&A, and then there will also be a book signing opportunity after that. So without further ado, Jerry Kaplan.
Excuse me a moment while I get myself arranged here. I'm not quite going to make it. I'll just set this here. Maybe I'll just hold it in my hand, see if I can do that. No, it's not going to work. And let me check this. I didn't have a chance to do it. Okay. These are the wrong slides. Oh, no, that's fine. Okay. They're in the wrong place. Excuse me, I've got to get myself arranged. Okay, now you've seen the whole talk. I don't know why it came out in this weird order, but okay. Well, thank you, Julian. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here today. So I come from a land far, far away, Stanford University, but from an intellectual perspective, to some degree, I'm kind of from a different planet. So I'm here visiting from a perspective that's quite different than some of the ideas that I've heard and read about. And so I want to make an apology right up front. I'm very respectful of the tremendous scholarship and the terrific ideas that have come out of here at places like the Future of Humanity Institute and some of the other work that's going on. But I come from an engineering perspective and look at this a bit differently. So in that sense, intellectually, it's kind of like being from a different planet. So I come in peace. Just want to make sure you know that. So I've focused today on some of the issues that are different, the points of view that are different, and there's wide areas of agreement, but I thought you don't need to hear about ideas that are the same as the folks here. I thought I would talk about things that are different. Let me get a sense for the audience. How many of you are students here? Okay. How many of you are engineering students? Oh, wow. Okay. Okay. How many of you work in the field of artificial intelligence? Okay. How many of you don't work in the field of artificial intelligence? Okay, thank you. How many of you haven't raised your hand yet? One in the back, Clara, okay. That's called closure for those of you who aren't studying computer science. Just want to be sure that you're all here and awake. So let me start with the question of can machines think? Now, the common wisdom about artificial intelligence is that we're building increasingly intelligent machines that are ultimately going to, let me see if I can do this, get arranged a little better. Sorry. We're looking at machines that we're building increasingly intelligent machines that are ultimately going to surpass human capabilities. that they're going to steal our jobs. This is, I think, the Oxford Martin School. I'm caricaturing a bit, but that's the ideas that I hear here. And possibly they might even escape human control and take over the world. So I'm going to take that caricature of a lot of very excellent work that's gone on here, and I'm going to speak in a different point of view. I want to present the case today that this is a misguided point of view, and frankly, it's a little bit counterproductive. Now, a more appropriate framing, in my view, which is better supported by the actual historical and current events happening in the field of artificial intelligence, is that AI is simply a natural expansion of long-standing efforts to automate tasks. It's dating it back at least to the start of the Industrial Revolution. And then I'm going to take that framing, that reframing, and I'm going to talk about the consequences of rethinking this whole emerging area of artificial intelligence in that particular context. So, what is artificial intelligence really? Can machines really think? Now, I've been in this field for over 30 years, and after a lifetime of work and a great deal of reflection really on this question, I have a reluctant and disappointing answer. The simple answer is no. Machines cannot think. Or at least they can't or they don't think the way that people think. So far there's really no obvious roadmap, in my view, based on my experience from here to there. Machines are not people. There's simply no persuasive argument that they're on the path, in my view, to becoming generally intelligent or sentient beings. Now, despite what all of us see in the movies. Now, Edgar Dijkstra is a computer scientist who's an early computer scientist. He once put this very well. He said, "The question of whether a machine can think is about as relevant as the question of whether a submarine can swim." Now, you might say, wait a minute, can't they solve all sorts of complex reasoning and perception problems? Sure, they can perform tasks that humans solve using intelligence. But that doesn't mean that the machines are intelligent. It merely means that many tasks we thought required general intelligence are, in fact, subject to solution by other, more mechanical means. Now, there's an old joke in AI that, since most of you aren't in AI, you probably haven't heard, which is that once an AI problem is solved, it's no longer artificial intelligence. Now, personally, I don't think that's any longer a joke. So I want to walk you through a little history, some of the signature achievements, accomplishments of artificial intelligence from this different perspective. Now, for decades, the archetypal test of the coming of age of artificial intelligence was whether a machine could ever beat the world's chess champion. Any of you old enough to remember this? You've seen that? For a very long time, chess was considered the quintessential demonstration of human intelligence. Surely, when a computer could beat the world's chess champion, artificial intelligence would have arrived. Oh my God, what were we going to do? Well, it happened in 1997 when IBM's Deep Blue beat the then world champion, Garry Kasparov, and there was lots of ink spilled in the media about the arrival of super intelligent machines, and there was lots of hand-wringing over what this meant for the future of mankind. But the truth is, it meant nothing. Other than that, you could do a lot of clever programming and use the increased speed of computers at the time to program a computer to play chess. Now, the techniques that were used have application to other similar classes of problems, that's true, but they hardly proved to be the harbingers of the robot apocalypse that everybody was concerned about at the time. Okay, well, then people said, sure, computers can play chess, but they'll never be able to drive a car. That requires a broad understanding of the real world, the ability to make split-second judgments in chaotic circumstances, and that requires common sense, something machines don't have. Well, as you know, this bulwark of human supremacy was breached in 2004 with the DARPA Grand Challenge for Autonomous Vehicles, and that's soon coming to a car park near you. How many of you have ridden in an autonomous vehicle so far? Got one. Okay, interesting. You get a different reaction. If I do this in, I was at Google about 2 weeks ago, you know. You can actually go into a dealership now and test drive the new SuperDrive, I think they call it in the Tesla. So it's available and everybody's getting experience with it. And yet, our self-driving cars do just that. They drive cars. They don't build houses, they don't cook meals, they don't make beds. They don't know the difference between a person out there on the road and a mannequin. Those are just equivalent objects that have a certain kind of appearance. So we speak of autonomous vehicles, but what that means to the engineers that are building them and what it means to the general public are really two different things. To an engineer, it means that data from sensors can be synthesized and analyzed to formulate control instructions that are sent to effectors like the brakes and the steering. That's what autonomous driving is about. But when you use that term with the general public, as it's being used today, it means to them that the car is looking around. It's figuring out what it's seeing, and then it's deciding what it wants to do next. Now, those two descriptions are fundamentally different. As a friend of mine who works on autonomous cars at Google recently said to me, your car will be truly autonomous when you instruct it to take you to the office and it decides to go to the beach instead. Okay, so computers can play chess and they can drive cars, but they could never play Jeopardy. You guys have Jeopardy here, I hope? It's like, good. That requires too much world knowledge, understanding metaphors and clever wordplay, things that computers can't do. Well, thanks again to the clever, ingenious people at IBM, that hurdle has also been cleared. As you probably know, IBM's Watson system, you guys heard of that? Beat Ken Jennings, who is the world's Jeopardy champion in 2011. Now, if we have engineers in the audience, what is Watson? The reality is it's a collection of facts and figures encoded into a cleverly organized set of modules that can quickly and accurately answer various types of common Jeopardy questions. You may not know this, but I've looked at the data, studied this. Watson's main advantage over the human contestants was that it could ring in before they could when it estimated a high likelihood that it had a correct answer. Most people don't realize almost every Jeopardy champion can answer almost every question. But it's a question of, they go, hear the question of whether they're going to press the button. Well, I got news for you. Robots can push buttons much faster than human beings. So it's really a remarkable and very sophisticated knowledge base retrieval and inference system that was honed, at least at that time, to a very particular problem set. Now, I want to tell you about something that people in artificial intelligence do that I'm not a fan of. And I'm going to call that gratuitous anthropomorphism. In my opinion, IBM doesn't do the field any favors by wrapping Watson into this theatrical suite of anthropomorphic features. You know, this was, as we say in the US, playing to the cheap seats. Is that an expression here? There's really no technical reason that the system had to say its responses in a calm, didactic tone of voice. Alex, that's North Dakota. You know, it didn't need to do that. And they didn't have to put up this headline graphic of swirling lights that suggested the machine had a mind and it was thinking about the problem. These are incidental adornments to what is really a tremendous technical achievement. But you have to think about what the social effect is, sociological effect on the general public. Without a deep understanding of these systems, how they work, and with only humans as the available exemplars which they could use to interpret those results, the temptation for the average person to view these systems as human-like is irresistible. But they aren't human-like at all. Okay, I know you do machine learning around here, it's all the rage where I live in the Silicon Valley. What about machine learning systems? Aren't they more like human intelligence? Well, not really. In reality, the use of anthropomorphic terms like deep learning and neural networks is really little more than an analogy, in the same sense that, like, airplanes have wings and that design is inspired by birds. You know, airplanes aren't mechanical birds. It's a different kind of a thing. Like, consider how machines and people learn. You teach a computer to recognize a cat, which was a tremendous technical achievement recently achieved, by showing it 1 million different images. Or you can simply point one out to a 3-year-old. That's a cat. And that's it. They know what a cat is from there on. Obviously, humans and machines don't learn the same way. Now, let's talk about some very practical effects of some of this technology. Here's an area that's made tremendous progress in the past 10 years or so. Machine translation. Anybody here doing machine translation? Oh, okay, I was just at Baidu. I don't know if you know where Baidu is. Like 3/4 of the hands in the audience went up. We're doing machine translation here. Now, tremendous strides have been made in this field in the past few years, but it's mainly by applying statistical and machine learning techniques to very large bodies of concorded texts. These are parallel corpuses. How do people perform the translation task? They learn 2 or more languages, along with all the respective cultural aspects of those languages and the conventions. And then they read some text in one language, they understand what it says, and they render the meaning as closely as possible as they can do in the other language. Now, machine translation, as successful as it is today, bears almost no relationship to the human translation process. Its success simply means that there's another way to approximate the same result mechanically. Let's look at smartphones. Now we carry around smartphones. I don't know how many of you think your phone is actually smart. These are reminiscent of the capabilities of the computer on the Star Trek Enterprise. You guys know about Star Trek here? I don't know how. Okay. I use most of my examples from Star Trek, or maybe HAL, the HAL 9000. You guys know what that is. Minus the homicidal intent on your phone, I hope. Hey Siri. Okay, you can talk to your phone, and it talks back. It also becomes more and more capable every day, right? Because you download new apps, and you upgrade the operating system. But do you guys really think of your phone as getting smarter in the human sense when you download an app, or if you enable voice recognition? Certainly not in the same sense that you get smarter when you learn something like calculus or philosophy. The truth is, a smartphone is the electronic equivalent of a Swiss Army knife. It's a bunch of different information processing tools that are bound together into a single unit that take advantage of certain commonalities in the device, like detailed maps or internet access. You may have one integrated mind, but your phone has no mind at all. There is no one home. So, what is intelligence? Let me move on to that. So machines can perform an increasingly diverse array of tasks that people perform by applying their native intelligence. Does this mean that the machines are smart? Well, let's look at how we might measure supposed machine intelligence. We can start by looking at how we measure human intelligence. One common measure, widely used, is the IQ, the intelligence quotient. But even for humans, this is a very deeply flawed concept. We love to measure and rank things with numbers, but let's face it, reducing human intelligence to a flat linear scale is highly questionable. Little Sally did 2 more arithmetic problems than Johnny did in the time allotted, so her IQ is 7 points higher than his. Bull. This is not to say that some people aren't smarter than others. Only that simple linear numeric measures provide an inappropriate patina of objectivity and precision. Now, psychologists are fond of pointing out that there are many different kinds of intelligence. There's a big debate in the psychological literature about this. Social, emotional, analytic, athletic, musical, different kinds of intelligence. I pulled this off the internet. I didn't make the picture up. Hopefully the police aren't going to come after me for using it. What does it mean to say that Mozart and Einstein both have IQs of 160? Okay. The truth is that intelligence isn't an objective, well-defined, measurable attribute like mass or volume. It's subjective. It's culturally influenced, sort of like the concept of beauty. So let me give you an example. Who's more attractive? You probably never thought you'd see a slide like this at Oxford. This is a little aside. I draw these from the slides that I give to my students at Stanford. And it's a wonderful institution, but the incoming freshmen, they tend to be overprivileged children of the rich, something I will get to in my talk. And they tend to have very short attention spans, so I use a lot of pictures rather than, yeah. Was it Clara that set me up here? Thank you very much for doing it. She went to my slide and says, yes, your slides are working. There are pictures on them. Okay. So who's more attractive? Victoria Beckham or Sienna Miller? Does everybody know who these people are? Because my wife, who is sitting back here, says, you're going to an English audience, these are people, they will know who it is. So I had to change my example. Now, is the answer the same in Nairobi? Is the answer the same in Karachi? Can you say that one is 6.5% more attractive than the other? Now, I presume you guys see the same movies that I do. And as anybody can see from the movies, female robots are getting more attractive and capable all the time. Now, if I were to subscribe to such a concept, maybe I could write a 400-page scholarly tome about how robots are becoming more attractive, and maybe I would call that super magnificence. And too bad Professor Bostrom's not here. I hate to make fun of him when he's not present in the room. And that this is an existential threat to humanity because when female robots begin to exceed human attractiveness, men are only going to desire to mate with them instead of with other people, and that's going to disrupt our natural reproductive process. So, this is news to moviegoers. This is a news flash for you guys. Robots don't have genders. There's no such thing as a female or a male robot. Just like there's no such thing as a generally intelligent robot. That's a comparable slice of science fiction. Now, let's suppose we give the same IQ test to a machine that we administer to humans. Wow, it only took 1 millisecond for that machine to accurately complete the same sums that took Sally and Johnny, who I mentioned earlier, a whole hour to do. That machine must be super smart. It also outperforms all humans on memory tests, logical reasoning tests, and God knows what else. Perhaps it can even shoot straighter or read faster, or outrun the fastest human. Oh my God, the robots can outperform us. What are we going to do when they decide they don't need us anymore and take over? So, are the robots taking over? By that logic, the machines took over long ago. They move our freight, they score our tests, they explore the cosmos, they plant and pick most of our crops, they trade stocks, they store and retrieve our documents, they manufacture just about everything, including themselves, although sometimes with human help, and sometimes without human intervention. And yet, they aren't taking over our businesses. They aren't marrying our children. They're not watching the sci-fi channel at home when we're not around. So what's wrong with the traditional picture of artificial intelligence? We can build machines and write programs that perform tasks that previously required human intelligence and attention. But there's nothing really new about that. Plowing a straight furrow used to be a matter of considerable human experience and skill. But today, nobody marvels at the ability of a tractor to do the same thing much better and faster than a human does. Painting natural-looking hair used to be a skill that's honed through years of practice and apprenticeship by our most talented artists. I just saw a bunch of it at the National Gallery in London. But no one blinks an eye when Disney uses CGI techniques to render and to animate Rapunzel's flowing hair. Now, both advances are better understood as progress in automation, not as a usurpation of human primacy. We can program machines to solve very complex problems, and we can program them to operate with increasing independence. But to call this a simulated form of human intelligence, from my perspective, coming as an engineer, that's really a little bit more than a fantasy. My point is very simple. Lots of problems that we think require intelligence to solve actually don't. There are other ways to solve them, and that's what we're doing when we're using machine intelligence. Now, calculating used to be the province of highly trained specialists. You may know this. They were known as calculators. You guys know that a calculator was a profession. You know, in 1940, if you took a problem to a calculator, it meant a person who was skilled at that. It was regarded as requiring considerable intelligence and attention to detail and skill. And now all it takes is a 99-cent calculator. Making money in the stock market used to be the province of experts. And now, you may know that the majority of stock trading is initiated by computers. The same thing's true for driving directions, for picking and packing orders in warehouses, designing more efficient wings for airplanes. Now, these are all certainly important advances, but you don't have to worry about the robots taking over. Robots don't have feelings, or they don't have independent goals, except in the movies. Now, there are many dangers associated with current artificial intelligence. But this idea that they're potentially going to rise up and take over is not one of them. Robots don't have independent goals and desires. A robot that you design to wash and fold laundry, it may be very sophisticated. It might learn to put the laundry away not to put the laundry away when you're sleeping, for example, or determine just how you have to like your shirts folded. But it isn't going to wake up one day and say, oh my God, what a fool I've been, I really want to play the great concert halls of Vienna. So, just as we can teach bears to ride bikes, and we can teach chimps to use sign language, we can build machines that perform tasks the way that people do, and even to simulate human emotions. We can make them say, ouch, when you pinch them, or to wag their tails when you pet them. But there's simply no evident, compelling reason that I've seen to believe that this bears any meaningful relationship to human behavior or human experience. Machines aren't people, even if we build them to talk and walk and to chew gum just like people do. Okay, where am I? Now I'm giving you a different way, a different framing to think about artificial intelligence. I don't want to overstate this. I'm not saying this is right and other points of view are wrong. I'm merely trying to introduce you to a different framing, a different way to look at the kinds of things you see in the press and the kinds of research and tools that you see being developed and products that are being developed. So let me talk now about the implications of this new experience. This is a different way of looking at it. It's certainly true that artificial intelligence is going to have a serious impact on labor markets and employment. And there's some really wonderful work that's gone on right here at the Oxford Martin School studying this particular issue. But perhaps the way that impact is going to occur isn't exactly the way that people expect. If you think of machines, here's how the framing matters. If you think of machines as becoming ever more intelligent and threatening our livelihoods, then the obvious solution is, well, prevent them from getting smarter. Let's lock our doors. Let's arm ourselves with tasers. And here at the New York Times, they say, robots steal jobs at record pace. This is a made-up headline. Last time I gave it to them, I haven't seen those headlines. The Wall Street Journal, same set of facts. Profits rise as worker productivity soars. Well, the robots are coming, but not exactly for our jobs. Machines and computers don't perform jobs. What they do is they automate tasks. Now, except in extreme cases, you don't roll in a robot and show an employee to the door. Instead, what happens is the new technology hollows out and changes the jobs that the people perform. And here's something most people don't realize, that even the most sophisticated experts spend the vast majority of their time doing mundane, repetitive, automatable tasks like reviewing lab test results, drafting simple contracts, writing straightforward press releases, filling out paperwork or other kinds of forms. Now, on the blue-collar side, there are lots of workers that lay bricks and paint houses and mow lawns and drive cars and load trucks and pack boxes, take blood samples, fight fires, deliver mail, and direct traffic. And many of these both intellectual and physical tasks actually require straightforward logic or simple hand-eye coordination, which hasn't been automatable until some new technologies have just come along. And the new technologies, which are mainly driven by advances in the field of artificial intelligence, are in fact poised to automate a lot of these tasks. So if your job involves a narrow, well-defined set of duties, which many jobs do, then indeed, your employment may be at risk. But if you have a broader set of responsibilities, or if your job requires a human touch, such as expressing sympathy or providing companionship, I don't think you have very much to worry about. Here, check out this comparison of the job duties of an LPN as a licensed practical nurse versus a bricklayer. Let me ask you a question. Whose job do you think is more at risk from automation? I've seen automated bricklaying machines that are now stack things on walls. They're just coming out of the labs. But look at some of these. I've highlighted these. This list is off of, I forget exactly where. It's probably the Bureau of Labor Statistics site. ONET. Maybe that's it. Thank you. I'm more expert than I am. This is a list of what you do in these jobs. Look at under the LPN duties. Ensuring patients and their families understand release instructions. Now, that's not something in my view that is really subject to automation. They actually say, right in the job description, providing emotional support. So most jobs involve a mix of general capabilities and specific skills, as the licensed practical nurses do. And as machines can perform more of their routine activities, the plain fact is that fewer people are needed to get those jobs done. What that means is, going back to my headlines from the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, excuse me, one person's productivity enhancing tool is actually another person's pink slip. Or more likely, it's a job opening that doesn't need to be filled for a longer period of time. So these are really the same thing. Enhancing productivity and putting people out of work are intimately connected. So automation, whether driven by artificial intelligence or not, also changes the skills that are necessary to perform the work. If your oncologist no longer needs to read MRIs, or the accountant operates a computer program instead of doing calculations, as when I was younger, they used to do it on hand, and different aptitudes and different talents and training are going to be required for those types of jobs. So the resulting loss of jobs is what economists call structural unemployment, which is the mismatch of skills to the needs of employers. Excuse me. So the more pressing problem posed by artificial intelligence for workers is not so much the lack of jobs, but the training that's required and the skills that are required to perform them. Historically, as automation has eliminated the need for workers, the resulting increase in wealth has eventually generated new kinds of jobs, and those jobs take up the slack. And I see no reason that this pattern is not going to continue. But the key word here is eventually. Now, I went back and looked at some labor statistics that I find quite remarkable. Excuse me, that's going to sound great over the web. Now, I'm afraid I'm very parochial. I use facts and figures from the United States, so I presume there's some relationship to what's going on here. 200 years ago, believe it or not, more than 90% of the US population worked in agriculture. Basically, all anybody did was grow and prepare food. Now, we like to watch Downton Abbey in the US. You guys see that here? You know, the people that you see there, that's like a tiny sliver of society. Everybody else was out in the fields, and the same thing was true in the US. Today, in the US, less than 2% of the population is required to grow the food for everybody. Oh my God, is everybody out of work? Of course not. We've had plenty of time to adapt. That's the key. And as our standard of living has relentlessly increased, which I'm going to get to in a moment, there have always been new opportunities that have arisen for people to fill the expanding expectations of our ever richer society. Like, think about this. If the average person from 1800 could see us today, they would think we had all gone nuts. Why not let's work a few hours a week, buy a sack of potatoes, get a jug of wine, build a shack out in the woods, dig a hole for an outhouse, and live a life of leisure. Now, somehow our rising expectations seem to have magically kept pace with our wealth. So you might ask the question, if 47% of the jobs go away, we just had a long conversation about that. There's a wonderful paper by Osborne and Frey, who are both here. So I got the microphone, so you can't stand up and beat me. Fabulous, very influential paper in the US. If they're going to go away, oh my God, what are we all going to do? The jobless future. How many books have we seen about that? Well, what are the jobs of the future? The answer is those that inherently involve a personal touch, demonstrations of skill, or person-to-person interactions. And I don't see why we can't be a society of competitive gamers, of artisans, of personal shoppers, of flower arrangers, of tennis pros, party planners. And no doubt, these are just things that happen today. There'll be a lot of things that don't exist yet. I mean, face it, nobody wants to go to a robotic undertaker. I am so sorry for your loss. It doesn't mean anything. We don't have to worry about that kind of automation. So who's going to do all the real work? Well, our great-grandchildren may think our idea of what work is so 21st century. It may only take 2% of the population, assisted by some pretty remarkable automation, to accomplish what today takes 90% of our labor. My view is, so what? It may be as important to these people, who are going to be way wealthier, I'll get to that in a minute, to have fresh flowers in the house each day, just as it is to many people in the US to take a shower every day. By the way, 70% of people in the US take a shower every day. I don't know what the figure is here. But you might be interested to know that in 1900, the average person took a shower once a week. So this is how our attitudes and values change. Now, two of my kids, I've got 4 kids. If you're not sympathetic enough, they're all girls. If you're not sympathetic enough, they were all teenagers at the same time. I hid under the bed for about 5 years. 2 of my kids just got their first jobs, and I couldn't help but notice that their chosen professions didn't even exist 10 years ago. One of them does social media promotion for restaurants, and the other one works in an online education company. Have you heard of Udacity? Got a couple of nods. Okay, she works there. So that's the good news. But the bad news is that it takes time for these transitions to happen, and a new wave of artificial intelligence-enabled applications is likely to accelerate this normal cycle of job destruction and creation. So what we're going to need is to find new ways to retrain displaced workers. Now, in my book, which is on that table, available for purchase in bookstores everywhere, one solution that I suggest in my book is, I just call it the idea of job mortgage. It isn't entirely original with me. Milton Friedman expressed a similar concept 50 years ago. And basically, this is that people should be able to learn new skills throughout their lifetime by borrowing not against their savings, but against their future earnings capacity. I learned today that here in England, in the UK, that you have kind of a system like that, where you pay back a proportion of your income. In the US, that's a wildly radical idea. We're very backward in the US. We actually have, there are paper towels in the bathroom, you know. Here they just have this thing that blows air. And somebody's going to have to explain, how do you wash your face in the bathroom with those things? So we need to find new ways to, I think I'm very entertaining. I entertain myself. So we need to find, my wife disagrees with me all the time. And she'll disagree with that too if I give her a chance. So we need to find new ways to train these displaced workers. So I talk about this idea of a job mortgage. Basically, the people should be able to learn new skills by borrowing against their future earnings capability. Now, in the US today, vocational training is really messed up. I believe it's much better here. And the reason, fundamental underlying reason that vocational education is so messed up in the US is that the government is the lender of first resort for student loans. The skills that people learn are disconnected because of that from the needs of the marketplace. So in the US, we're not investing in education. We're handing out money to people to learn things that won't help them pay it back. And if you can't get a job, that's too bad. Your student loan is still due. Major problem in the US today. Now, what we need to do is to create new kinds of financial instruments to solve these problems so that we can tie the deployment of capital to the return on that kind of investment, just as we do with home mortgages and with loans to businesses. So we can use the discipline of the marketplace to help us productively repurpose displaced workers. So that benefits not only those people who are find their skills obsoleted, but it also benefits society in general because we'll be more productive. Now, finally, there's another dark cloud related to advances in artificial intelligence. Now, while it's true that automation makes society richer, there are very serious questions about whose pockets are filled by that increased wealth. Now, the people in high tech, where I live, tend to believe that we're all developing dazzling technologies for a needy and grateful world. And indeed, we've made tremendous progress on raising the standard of living of the very poorest of the poor worldwide. I know that's being studied here, and people have been working on that. Professor Golding has done some excellent work on that, I believe. And we're making tremendous progress on that, but for the developed world, the news is not so good. Up until about 1970, on and off, we've found ways to distribute at least some of those economic benefits of that increased productivity broadly across society. And that supported the rise of this mythical middle class, at least in the US. But it doesn't take much to see that those days are over. Since about 1970, the average income in the US has stagnated. Now, as economists know, automation is the substitution of capital for labor. And I'm here to tell you today that Karl Marx was right. The struggle between capital and labor, it's a losing proposition for the workers. And what that means is that the benefits of the automation naturally accrue to those who can invest in those new systems. These are my capitalists. This went over really well at Microsoft. Anybody know who these people are on the left? Nobody? Oh my God. Okay, that's Bill Gates and me. This is me and Paul Allen. These are the founders of Microsoft. You guys know who Microsoft is. I used to make computers. Okay? That's me on piano, and he's great on guitar, by the way. Paul Allen's terrific. So the real question is, where should the benefits of this new increased wealth go? If people are making the investment, shouldn't they be getting the return? My answer is, well, it makes logical sense in our current economy. The truth is that people aren't working harder than they used to. They aren't smarter than they used to be. In fact, you might be interested to know that working hours have decreased slowly but consistently for the last 100 years. And the reason we can now do more with less is that business owners invest some of their capital into process and productivity improvements, and of course, they reap the rewards. So what has all this got to do with artificial intelligence? The technologies, I'm here to tell you, the technologies that I see on the drawing boards in the labs at Stanford and around the world are quickening the hearts of entrepreneurs and investors everywhere. And the truth is that those are the people who stand to benefit. And they're able to export more and more of the risk to the rest of society. In the US, workers are less secure. Wages stagnate. Pension funds go bust. You know, we're raising a generation of contractors for what's called the gig economy. Have any of you heard that term? It means you just kind of do pickup work, like drive for Uber. It's a big thing where I am. And their variable working hours and their health benefits, that's their problem, where it used to be the problem of the employers. Now, some people have the mistaken impression that the free market is going to address these problems, if only we can get the government out of the way. I guess you guys don't watch the Republican debates. It's very frightening. But I'm here to tell you, as somewhat of a recipient of these policies, that the US economy is hardly an example of unfettered capitalism. The fact is, there are all sorts of rules and policies that drive where the capital goes, how it's deployed, and who gets those returns. So the problem is that our economic and our regulatory policies have been decoupled from our social goals. And we have to fix that. But how? Okay, now that I've scared everybody about our economy, let me give you the good news. It's not a dark picture at all. I showed you about farm labor and how what used to employ everybody now employs only 2% of the population. Let me show you the same thing for the United States gross domestic product. That's the overall aggregate wealth. The economy is not static. It doubles about every 40 years. And the peculiar thing is it's actually done that pretty reliably since the start of the Industrial Revolution in the 1700s. Now, in 1800, the average household income in the US, anybody want to venture a guess? $20,000? It's a good guess. I got $20,000. No, it was $1,000. Read it off the chart, but I distracted him while he did that. The average household income in the US was $1,000. And that's an inflation-adjusted figure. I mean, I'm talking about the equivalent of $1,000 today. That is about the same as it is today in Malawi and in Mozambique. And it's probably not coincidental that their economies structurally look surprisingly similar to what the US economy looked like 200 years ago. Now, I really doubt that people in Ben Franklin's time thought of themselves as dirt poor, that they were barely scratching out an existence. But that's how wealthy people were back then. So what does this mean? Assuming this pattern continues, and I think it almost certainly will, 40 years from now, most likely, there'll be literally twice as much wealth, at least in the US and probably in other parts of the world, to go around. We'll have twice as much wealth. So the challenge for us is to implement policies that will encourage that new wealth to be more broadly distributed. We don't have to play Robin Hood. We don't have to steal from the rich and give to the poor. To me, that's just stirring up the pot, hoping that it doesn't come to a boil. We need to provide incentives for entrepreneurs and businesses to find ways to benefit not just themselves, but ever wider swaths of society. So, in my book, which is on that table and is available in bookstores worldwide, I give examples of the kind of thinking that I think we need to do. So, let me give you just one. I suggest that we make corporate taxes progressive. Progressive in the sense that they're based on how broadly distributed the company's equity is. So the more stockholders that a company has, suitably defined, the lower their tax rate would be. Now, you may not know, Microsoft has a very widely distributed equity. And it should pay a lower tax rate than Bechtel. Probably, anybody here heard of Bechtel? Oh, we good, okay. It's probably the equivalent in the US of what, the Bin Laden group or something? I don't know, very narrowly held. It's held by a family, and they do enormous engineering projects worldwide, and it's very, very profitable. But my point is that if Microsoft pays a lower tax rate than Bechtel, what's going to happen is that people running these companies, they're going to have a competitive advantage in the marketplace. So take two Microsofts, one of them is owned by one family, like the Waltons, the Walmart family, and another one is broadly distributed. One of them has a competitive advantage, and that company, each company that has a more widely distributed state of class of shareholders will have an advantage and they will grow. Believe me, people will figure out how to get their stock into people's hands if we do things like this. Now, I'm not saying this is the solution. I'm not even saying it's a good idea. It's just the kind of thinking that I think we need to do. Instead of thinking about jobs as a static set, this is what people do, and oh my God, half of them are going to be out of work. Without thinking of the economy as, well, we've got a certain amount of wealth today, and how are we going to get it from up here to down there? What we need to do is look at this dynamically. And I was around 40 years ago, and I've seen enough frames of this movie to understand that things are changing in the directions that I'm discussing here, and what we need to do is to recognize that and adopt policies where the wind will be at our back for fixing a lot of these problems. So let me, a conclusion, let me wrap things up. How am I doing on time?
This is the right place to be.
Okay. Okay. So I want to recap a little bit. I don't want you to think that I'm anti-AI. Nothing could be farther from the truth. I actually believe that its potential impact on the world, and I'm not exaggerating about this, is similar to the invention of the wheel. But we need to think of it not as some kind of magical discontinuity in the development of intelligent life on Earth, but rather to think of it as a collection of powerful automation tools that have the potential to transform our livelihoods and to vastly increase our wealth. And the challenge that we face is that our existing institutions, without some enlightened rethinking, run a serious risk of making a mess out of this opportunity. Now, I'm supremely confident that our future is very bright. It's going to be more Star Trek than Terminator. But the problem is that the transition may be protracted and brutal unless we pay some attention to these issues that I've raised today. We have to find new and better ways to ensure that our economy doesn't motor on, going faster and faster, while throwing ever more people overboard. Our technology and our economy should serve us, not the other way around. So thank you very much. Julian's going to moderate some questions, but has anybody been to London and seen the show, The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Night? A couple of people here. Now, you know what they did in that show. It's very clever. They actually had the curtain calls, which we've just now done. And then there's a question that was raised, or begged, I should say, in the original, throughout the entire show. And then as everybody's getting up and they bring up the house lights, the crew hits the stage again and answers this question. It's a wonderful technique. So I'm going to ask myself the first question, which is, I've left one obvious question unanswered. If this is really just about engineering and automation, why on earth do we call it artificial intelligence? Now, here's a quick history lesson. See if I can find it. Dartmouth College, 1956. Summer of 1956, a group of scientists got together for a working session led by a guy named John McCarthy. How many people here have heard of John McCarthy? Oh, pretty good, okay. Now, he was then employed at Dartmouth, and he was hosting the meeting. And his proposal for the Dartmouth Summer Research Project on artificial intelligence is what he named it. And that was the first known use of the term artificial intelligence. Now, what's not commonly known is why John McCarthy chose that catchy phrase. Now, he was asked this later, much, much later, fairly recently, although he's now dead. John explained his motivation. He said, "As for myself, one of the reasons for inventing the term artificial intelligence was to escape association with cybernetics. Its concentration on analog feedback seemed misguided, and I wished to avoid having to either accept Norbert Wiener as a guru or having to argue with him." Now, who's Norbert Wiener? He was a highly respected senior mathematician and a philosopher at MIT. And John, who I knew at Stanford, was at that time, he's a junior professor at Dartmouth. So the problem McCarthy's trying to solve is he's trying to get out from underneath Wiener's shadow, and he's got to work to secure tenure at Dartmouth. So he had to name what he was doing something else. So I'd say I'm old enough to have known him. Now, he was a classic American boffin, including all the wild hair and the incredibly poor social skills. And he mistakenly believed that mathematical logic was the basis for human intelligence. And that's an idea, even within the field, that's been sort of soundly rejected and debunked since then. Now, I'm confident, having known him, that he never expected that his clever name for this emerging field would turn out to be one of the great accidental marketing coups of all time. Now, if he'd named the field logical programming, or if he called it symbolic engineering, I expect we wouldn't be sitting here today talking about, oh my God, artificial intelligence. It simply would have chugged along, automating various tasks, while we marveled not at the cleverness of the creations, but at the cleverness of those engineers. Instead, his term artificial intelligence has spawned a virtual industry of science fiction and Hollywood blockbusters and media attention and pontificating pundits, hopefully like me. I just want to tell you, that is the power of a good marketing slogan.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We've got some time now for questions. There are one or two roving microphones. I should just say this is being recorded and live webcast, so if you're uncomfortable with that, please save your questions till afterwards. Okay? So, can I have a show of hands? We have a question right here at the front to start.
In the first part of your talk, you explained about how machine translation and computer chess aren't anything like human thinking, but there's always been research projects that have tried to do that. There was computer chess programs that tried to interview grandmasters and encode the heuristics, or machine translation that would parse sentences and map them into semantics, and they didn't perform any near as well as the brute force ones, but they weren't like failures in their progress. But so the question is more whether what you said about AI, I don't disagree, but I also don't see why there can't be an AI where the robots are thinking much more like us. They have maybe even beliefs and desires even, that one could build them, even if what you said is right, that nobody's building them of that sort right now.
Well, this is a very good question. So let me first of all talk about what you were talking about. I was dead center of this stuff. I was the marketing guy at one of the first expert systems companies, which is what you're talking about. We would interview experts, and we would codify their expertise into rules and use John McCarthy's basic formalism, saying you could convert expertise into logic. And anybody here heard of Ed Feigenbaum, Professor Feigenbaum? Okay, you have. Okay, good. The guy who asked the question, I guess that's all that counts. I had to trot around with Ed Feigenbaum, and he was scaring the world on tour, just as the esteemed Professor Bostrom is running around talking about superintelligence. He was going around the world giving this talk about the dangers of, I hate to make this kind of racial, he would talk about the Japanese and the 5th generation computer project, and oh my God, and he got the government to invest in it. Well, it was a big bust. And the truth is that was a lousy way to do it, and it didn't work very well. Those techniques are now used in a lot of places. Just, I think of them as engineering and automation. That was the first thing. The second one you said was machine translation. Well, guess what? My PhD is in computational linguistics. I wrote one of those early systems. We used all of the work that the linguists had done. The whole department was collaborating with the linguistics department. We had syntax and semantics, and I was working on, or at the time we were calling pragmatics, building question answering machines. And I built one for my PhD thesis. I'm not above this same kind of gratuitous anthropomorphism, or at least I wasn't. And they didn't work very well. The new techniques are far, far more powerful, and they do way better. And they are not based upon what I might call the academic research that was based on the way people, Chomsky's ideas about generative grammars and the idea that that might be what's going on in your head. It may be what's going on in your head. Now, there are people who are working on this area, and generally it's called AGI, Artificial General Intelligence. And there are some people who I think have a very legitimate claim that they're tackling the problem of trying to take the manner in which humans do this and to duplicate it in machines. I have a good friend, Jeff Hawkins. Anybody know Jeff? He did the original Palm Pilot. And he has a research institute. When you grow up, if you start a company, you can start your own research institute. I'll let you know that. He has a reasonable claim that he's working on that. And believes he's making progress. But I'm just being very objective about it. I have not seen any significant reason to believe that those approaches are working or that they're happening. And I have a whole other lecture I can give you on the origins of machine learning. It goes back to a guy named Frank Rosenblatt, 1957, the same time McCarthy was, who had a completely different approach, which is basically the neural networking approach today. And these are very valuable techniques. But I believe, this is just based on my experience, and I'm just, as we say, spitballing here, I don't have any proof of this, is that there's at least one major turn of the crank before we will have any theory of general intelligence and something that we can build that is based upon that theory and that might act as humans do. So without any evidence and any meaningful progress in my experience over my lifetime, I'm just a little reluctant to say that the stuff you see in the movies is around the corner. We're not getting off the ground. It's a little bit like they used to say, it's like climbing a tree and then claiming you're making progress getting to the moon. There just doesn't seem to be a connect between the two.
Okay, there was a question at the back. Yes.
Oh, we're doing good on time.
Hello, thank you for that talk, which I really enjoyed. My question might be similar, so I don't know whether you've answered it already, but I just want to ask what you think the main difference is between humans and robots, because you touched on quite a bit about emotions and feelings, and you gave the examples of the submarine and the airplane. But could it be the case that we're just at a primitive stage of artificial intelligence right now, and that with the advancement of technology, instead of having these separate constitutive parts, we will be able to build a robot which is this integrated whole? Because also, when you talk about emotions and feelings, if we say those are the things that makes us human, are we saying that some people are more human than others? Because clearly in society, there's a spectrum of individuals who, like, some people feel more than others, and some people express their emotions more than others.
Well, you covered a couple of different things. being, my wife would tell me I'm semi-autistic myself. I feel competent to say there are definitely differences in terms of how interpersonally sensitive different people are. But the point is, yes, in principle, this can happen. In practice, it's like we're not getting off the ground. And, we're worrying not about whether near-Earth objects are going to impact the Earth and therefore wipe out humanity. We're worrying about whether aliens are going to land. There's reasonable... Let me use a different analogy that might make this clear. This worrying about runaway superintelligence, in my view, is a little bit like worrying about the zombie apocalypse. Now, I use that example very specifically because you guys may or may not know that zombies, as opposed to werewolves and as opposed to vampires, all three of which my children are complete experts in, the behavior and sociology of these three different classes, it's actually based on something. In the Caribbean, there was a type of plant that you might accidentally ingest that would paralyze you, and people would slow down your system, and people would think you were dead. This is just interesting, weird stuff. That, I should put this in Ripley's Believe It or Not over here on Regent Street. Occasionally they would think that people were dead, and then they would, of course, get out of it when they were about to get buried, and they come back alive. And apparently they were very discombobulated. And so that's the root of the zombie mythology. So you say, well, it's based on something. But, I mean, come on. So when I say there are some things one could look at and say, well, these are beginnings or the roots of an artificially intelligent general machine. But I mean, we're really coming to understand much better in the sciences that what makes you human is a combination of your embodiment and your instincts that are not necessarily related to logic, which is John McCarthy's mistake, or learning. I mean, the term machine learning implies something that it's really just a bunch of statistical techniques and a couple of programming techniques. I mean, if you open up we've got to get the magic pixie dust out of this field and open up the box and look inside, and you just don't see much of anything. So it's very powerful stuff, and it's going to have tremendous societal effects. But I don't think that worrying about this becoming more general or intelligent is really justified by the technologies that I see today. So let me see.
Okay, we've got another couple of questions at the back there. So if we take the gentleman on the left.
It seems to me that what we need to fear is not machines, but actually humans. The thing that concerns me most is social inequality. There's so many tasks that can be replaced by a machine that the people who own the machines, there are only so many Zumba instructors that they can require. And you take an example, so the real issue, as you said, is about redistribution of wealth through sort of mechanisms of incentive. But even if you look at key problems like sustainability and climate change, we know there's a problem. It's perfectly obvious, but there's a real barrier to us solving that quickly. So is not the problem not actually the machines, but our ability to adapt fast enough?
Oh, absolutely. I was tempting to make that point. It's this problem is like the transformation of the job market, of the creative destruction, is very much analogous to global warming. If it happens over 100,000 years, the life has time to adapt. If it happens in 50 years, we got a real problem on our hands. Now, the same thing was true from 1800 to today, 200 years. That was plenty of time for almost the entire population to get out of agriculture and go develop new areas and learn new things. If it happens in 30 years or 50 years, that half the jobs are going to go away, as these gentlemen have so carefully studied, now we have a real serious problem. Now, the problem will right itself. All of those people who are put out of work, they'll get old and starve and die in poverty. And then everything's fine again. The people who are left, maybe it's only 5% of the population that's around today, they'll all be living a beautiful life of riches. But what do we really want to do? What is our social goals with respect to the people who are dispossessed by this technology, both in terms of their job skills and in terms of their participation in the economy? That's kind of my point. We're at an inflection point of rapidly increasing effects of automation. And I say that, I'm making a general statement, but I'm in the damn lab. I know what's coming out of that lab. I can see it. Things that require hand-eye coordination, I made you a long list of the blue-collar work. Now we have technologies that can apply broadly. Digging ditches and painting houses. And I mean, every week I run into people who are working on all of these kinds of problems, and that's going to have a dramatic effect on putting people out of work.
Okay, we have one more question at the back there, and then we'll come back up to the front.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for a very, very interesting talk.
Thank you.
It's maybe more of a concern, and there was with that one point about student debt and the question as to how we should fund education. To me, it seems, given that we adapt to whatever life circumstances there may be, it seems odd to demand that we should change our education such that we increase our productivity if the levels of productivity that we have already seem to be close to being enough. So don't we enter a kind of age in which people should be able to do a kind of education that will lead them to do stuff they like, but that might not be all that productive? So I was just wondering about your views on that.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure I understood your question, but I think it's called the Luddite fallacy. I got one nod out of, so he must be right, agrees with me. The idea is, well, things are fine the way they are. Let's just stop this from happening. But it's a tide of history. The automation is going to go on. It's going to be very difficult to avoid this, and we better adapt our policies and our economy to going to make that happen. Are you a student?
Yeah.
Do you have a student loan?
Yeah.
Okay, there you go. Well, you own a house? Probably not. Maybe you don't own a house. Okay. There's only so much I can pack into a lecture like this. But if you look at the history of housing finance in the US, it's really quite interesting. There was a decision made about 80 or 90 years ago in the US that they wanted to encourage home ownership. And so they went about this with a new economic policy, which was the Home Mortgage Act, I think it was called. And there were a couple of these over periods of time. And basically the idea was you could take out a loan, and instead of you being responsible for it, it was whether it got paid back was based upon what's called non-recourse loans. The house is the security for the loan, not you. And what I'm suggesting is we can think of the same thing in terms of our investment in education. It's not that you as the student are required, you're not on the hook 100%. You may be on the hook 20%, which is what they do in the housing market typically. You have an 80% mortgage. And so the housing, what happened as a result of that was there was an enormous boom in home ownership in the US. I'm not going to be able to pull the figures right out of my head, but I think it's up at 60% now, and it was at like 30%, doubled home ownership in the US by having this economic policy. So what I'm saying is you can do the same thing for education. There are two basic problems, which is how we finance this stuff, and the second one is, when do you do it? Our current model, which is you go to school, you learn, you take your A-levels or whatever you had to do to get here, and then you learn a profession, and now you're in that profession for the next 40 or 50 years. That model won't work when the jobs and the needs are changing as we move to the future. You need to have a notion of a way to go back and retrain and gain new kinds of skills throughout your lifetime. So we have to make a sociological change in the way we think about that kind of work.
So we had some hands at the front here. Okay. We'll start with the lady in the, yes.
So you talk.
Thank you for coming. Don't forget to tip your waitress.
So you sort of talked about how you're confident that our economy will be able to adapt to these coming changes.
Can't hear you.
Our economy will be able to adapt to these coming changes. But you didn't really take into account, I guess, sort of like our personal relationships. Like you said that we will definitely need jobs that require human interaction still. But my question is sort of like, with the prevalence of computers, do you think that will sort of degrade our need for emotional support from a nurse? And like following from that, it's sort of like for logic beneath it. Do you think we could give those sort of characteristics to robots just because?
It's a very good question. Again, I have another hour-long lecture on this subject for gratuitous anthropomorphism. It's a very complex subject, actually. There are certain aspects of jobs that are really, I would call them transactional. You're trying to get something accomplished. And then often in those same jobs, there are aspects of them that I would regard as social, where you feel like you're making a connection with another human being. We were talking about this earlier today with somebody, about baristas, people who make coffee and things like that. Well, you can automate that, and you can build shops that have no people in them. You go in, you push your button, and you get your espresso, and you go and you sit down. But the reason that Starbucks is so successful, as you may know, Howard Schultz, is that the name of the guy who founded it? Was he recognized that it was a social activity. And it was the interaction among the people and the interaction between the people serving and the people consuming that caffeine that that was part of the experience, and it was very important. So yes, we can build robotic baristas, but Starbucks is not going to use them because that's not what it's all about. Now, on the other side of the coin, I remember a time, I'm an old guy, I remember a time when if you wanted cash, you went down to the bank, and you damn well better get there before 3 p.m. on a Friday, and you went in and you talked to the teller, and he or she would dole out some money, and how are you, what are the kids doing, and all that. And then the ATM came along. Well, I didn't really want to have a conversation with somebody, I just wanted to get my cash and run. So I was part of the generation that just immediately switched over to using an ATM. That's an example of this same process going in the other direction. So what it comes down to is what are the job skills? A geisha in Japan may serve sake, and that's how you get your sake, but there's also a social interaction, which is an important part of it. Nobody wants to date a robot. It's not going to happen. And the idea of having a robotic geisha, even though there are people working on such a completely preposterous notion, it's not going to be successful. So,
It's incorrect that nobody wants to date a robot. I just challenged
the geisha, okay. Well, yeah. You and I, this is a topic in certain respects that I don't feel is appropriate to get into with the audience. But there are certain professions which may be automated sooner and in different ways than we might wish. So, but the point is that if it involves a human connection, and nobody wants to have a robot tell it how sorry it is about something. You want to know, here's why. You want to believe that the other person that you're speaking to is having the same emotional experience that you are. It's not the expression of the words. It's the experience that is shared, the human experience that is shared. And I'm not speaking about some touchy-feely vague thing. This is what people in these jobs do. You may not want in 50 years to have your flowers arranged by a robot. You want to know that your flower arranger who came in to set up those flowers is expressing some sense of how your day is going to go, or their judgment about something. So that's my answer to your question.
That's a new euphemism for us all. To Andrew.
Yeah, so I guess I was curious, a lot of what you touched on was kind of how do we retool people so that they can kind of have jobs in the new economy.
Yes.
And I guess I was curious as to whether or not we should just go straight for the Star Trek scenario and think about a world in which people don't actually need jobs and what would be required for that. And so whether or not that's a universal income or maybe a universal capital endowment, and kind of what the merits of those policies would be and how soon we could realistically get that.
Well, I think at the root of that is a slight misconception, at least the way people interpret your question. I know that you understand this much better, which is what we do today are jobs, but what we're going to do tomorrow aren't jobs. Our notion of what is a job is going to shift. And so I think that the idea of a jobless future, history doesn't suggest that that's what's going to happen. The Star Trek scenario, I would love to flip a switch and get there, until the Borg shows up. But the truth is we're not there. And the question is, how do you get to a society like that? Now, in the US, there's this crazy notion that if you give people a basic income, that they're just going to kind of goof off, sit on the couch, and play video games all day. And all of the research suggests otherwise. What it does is it gives people the freedom to innovate, it gives people the freedom to learn new skills, and that's what basic income is likely to do. But people don't work just to make money. This is a corollary of what I was saying to you. There's a transactional aspect to jobs, there's a social aspect to jobs. Your personal sense of self-worth comes from your perception of whether you're delivering something of value to other people. And volunteering at the local elder facility, which today is a volunteer thing, not a job, may be considered a job in the future. And there'll be plenty of money to pay you to do that. And it may give you a sense of satisfaction. Another reason that people are always going to work is social hierarchy. It's probably not quite the right term for it. But we engage in certain mating rituals, and when you kind of strip back a lot of the fluff off of it, the truth is you want to be more prominent than the next person and more desirable and attractive than the next person. And that's just not how you look. That's how much influence you have over your peers, how respected you are, and all of that kind of thing. And so the idea that people are going to not want to work is silly. I think there's plenty of motivation, and what we think of as jobs is going to change.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess like moving towards a society in which one's income and one's work are totally decoupled, maybe like kind of a volunteer society or something.
Sure. Well, look, here's an interesting example that are you guys familiar with Bitcoins? Do you know what a Bitcoin miner does? Okay, some of you do. It's a crazy term. It's like artificial intelligence. You're a Bitcoin miner. But what Bitcoin miners do is they validate the blockchain. Now, how many of you know what that means? I got one guy, yeah. We were talking earlier. Now, validating the blockchain, might think it's just a mathematical process, which in a way it is. But the truth is, what it's doing is, how do I put this? It's authenticating some process or some object. Like, is that a real Van Gogh? The blockchain, when you authenticate, will tell you that that was the same one or whatever that was sold by the original person. That you can trace it all the way back. So do you really own it? Well, you can go and chase the blockchain back. So somebody who validates the blockchain is actually performing the same function that today we use. It's not accountants. I'm sorry, I'm losing my word. There's a auditor. Yeah, like that's what auditors do. They validate financial transactions, which is what the blockchain is about. So your children may be highly respected members of Ernst & Young doing a blockchain validation. That may be in the future. So even doing a mathematical thing may provide great prestige and in fact justify significant economic benefits and payment to yourself. So I give you that as an example to think about what the future is going to be like. It's not going to be like the way it is today.
We have a question here.
Thank you for your talk.
Thank you.
You gave wonderful examples of jobs that are kind of much more vulnerable to automation, like bricklayer, and jobs that are unlikely to be vulnerable, like nurse. And basically, so the correlation there was that the closer you are to human interaction, the harder it is to automate that job. So what do you think of the job or the profession of AI developers? Where does that fall in that categorization and why?
Yes. Well, will there always be AI developers? They'll always be in England, Obviously, today it's a big deal. But look, I got a PhD in that field 30 years ago. And one of the things that I believe we are not doing properly, this goes to one of my points, is that I think that PhDs should come with expiration dates. Because 5 or 10 years later, these skills that I had to learn, compiler theory, circuit design, minimization of logic, that was completely automated within 10 years. So what we call AI today is, I feel like you know what Rip Van Winkle is? You know, I was at the Stanford AI Lab 30 years ago, and then I went off to the big wide world, you know, to start companies and do crazy things, as did you. And then I went back, and it was like the dinosaurs had died, and you know the marsupials had taken over or something. They were completely different. The skill set, the things that people learned, even their knowledge of what used to be taught, and the people were completely changed. So, as long as we keep changing what we mean by artificial intelligence, I don't think it's going to be much of a problem. But whether that's actually going to be the case. Pardon me?
I probably should have used more quiz definitions.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, we're always going to need people to do that. Well, it's going to change. It's going to get higher and higher level. There's a very good argument that I've heard going on in the Silicon Valley right now. Why are there so many startups? Why are there so much? The reason is it's become so easy to learn how to program. It used to take years and years of study, and now there are very high-level tools. And those are almost magical compared to the stuff that I had when I was younger. And so lots and lots of people are doing it. So the skills that are needed have changed, and that also changes the access to the technology and the people that can benefit from it.
Okay, we've got one more question, and this
One
chap
more
here's
question,
been
yeah.
catching my eye. So this one last
So
quick
I
question.
have a comment on the section on the polarization of wealth and counter policies for that. So I think what's different today that wasn't to the Industrial Revolution was that if we improve a process, let's say in a factory, and it would cut jobs for people, let's say, within the vicinity of 20 kilometers or a region. Whereas what happens today, you have companies in Silicon Valley who are able to create products and services which are destroying jobs all over the world, right?
Yes.
And then when you think about designing policies, as you suggested with the corporate tax measure, you're speaking about the US.
I am.
And when you think about Uber, Uber is creating services which are affecting transportation markets in Sao Paulo, in Chengdu. The same goes for Airbnb. And then the polarization of wealth goes back into the US and to the places where actually the technology is being created.
I think that, unfortunately, it's quite true. Now, I'm usually talking to US audiences, so, I mean, they don't even know much about what goes on in Canada or Mexico, you know. It's kind of, but I think you're quite correct. I haven't studied this with the same kind of objectivity and erudition that is typical of the work that I see here at the Oxford Martin School. But there's a great sucking sound. And I'm seeing people, and I know a lot of them, who are becoming, they're like kings and queens. They're so fabulously wealthy. Price, it means nothing. I have one friend, he's a perfectly nice guy. He's got 7 residential properties because he wanted a ranch and he wanted a place on the beach, and he, didn't matter. You have no idea. There's people riding around and, flying in helicopters out there, and some of them are underneath the radar. Most, you don't hear all the common names of this stuff, and it's ridiculous. And the funny thing is, if you talk to these guys, they're not like the Karl Marx capitalists, the heck with everybody else. They're real worried about this too. That doesn't mean they're going to give all their money away. Actually, a lot of them are considering doing that. Here's a weird fact. Up until fairly recently, anybody here drink California wines? Now, here's a weird fact. I'm full of weird facts. I should work for Ripley's, believe it or not. Up until fairly recently, California exports a tremendous amount of wine to the rest of the world, but it's a net importer of wine. There is more wine consumed there than is produced in California. I actually believe, and I'm considering writing a book about this, that the Silicon Valley is a net consumer of capital. It's dragging capital and it's not making the world wealthier. It's impoverishing many places, which is what you're talking about, and it's bringing it home. Uber's a very interesting example. A friend of mine just literally, he lives in the suburbs, he gave up his car because you can get an Uber in 2 minutes where we happen to live. Now, their point of view at Uber, hey, we're going to employ, they believe their figure is 500,000 drivers. Look, look what we're doing for people. We've got all these great new jobs as drivers at Uber. But they're investing $50 million in getting rid of the drivers. And in 5 or 7 or 10 years, they're not going to need those 500,000 people. And guess what? It's still going to cost the same amount to take the Uber, maybe a little bit less, and that money's going to go into the pockets of a bunch of people who are wearing pearls and eating oysters in downtown San Francisco. And that's not a good thing. That's the point. I need you guys to understand that we really need as a society to say, stop. We need to think about these issues. We need to align our economic policies and our social policies so that everybody benefits. And so we don't become more like ancient Egypt, where the pharaoh, believe it or not, owned everything. 100% of assets were owned by the pharaoh, and everybody else worked for the pharaoh. If the pharaoh wanted a tomb to take them in comfort to the afterlife, they could snap their fingers and have 10,000 people work for 25 years to build their tomb. Now, you might think, well, that's not stable, that kind of an economy. But ancient Egypt was stable for 4,000 years. And we are heading, and could very well be heading, toward the same kind of thing here. I don't want that friend who's got, sorry I'm ranting, but you can continue to rant.
10 more seconds.
10 more seconds. That friend who has 7 residential properties have his 14-year-old boy who's really interested maybe in the Civil War. I'm making this up, but I'm illustrating a point. Say for his birthday next year, I want to do a Civil War battle reenactment. And we're going to need 5,000 people, and we're going to have all the costumes made and everything, and we'll put on this pageant for his birthday. He can afford to do that. That's how wealthy we're talking about. And that, I don't want the future to be us rubbing the feet of the super rich and hoping that we get a few cast-offs or hand-offs, a sort of Downton Abbey style, being gracious. I'm over it. Okay. Well, thank you. I just got the hook.
Hang on. I was just going to finish. Thank you very much. But before we thank you, I want to just draw your attention to a few other events that we've got coming up here at the school that I think will interest you. It's the 10th anniversary of the Oxford Martin School, and so every Thursday we have a seminar from one of our different programs just to illustrate all the different kinds of work we've been involved in, and we're doing that all term. So this Thursday at 5 o'clock in this room, we have a talk from Professor Julian Savulescu called Creating the Perfect Human, the Ethics of Enhancement, and he'll be looking at whether we have the means necessary to create the perfect human and whether we actually have a moral responsibility to do so. And the following Thursday, the 26th of November, again 5 o'clock in this room, Professor Adrian Hill, who'll be talking about how vaccines stimulate the immune system, how we can use this knowledge to develop more effective vaccines for future pandemics. And Adrian's group was heavily involved in the Ebola vaccine development. 2 other one-off events. On the 23rd of November at 5 o'clock in the Sheldonian, it's our big 10th anniversary lecture, and that is going to be delivered by Lord Martin Rees, who is a big expert in the AI field and rejoices under, well, he has many titles, but my favorite of his titles is the Astronomer Royal. And he'll be talking about, will technology's dark side eclipse humanity's bright future? So, again, very much on message. And the last one I wanted to draw your attention to is from Lord Adair Turner. He's the chair of the Financial Service Authority, and he was very much in the engine room during the global financial crash, and he will be talking about Between Debt and the Devil, Money, Credit, and Fixing Global Finance, and that's on Tuesday the 24th of November at 5 o'clock here. So, last thing to say, there are books and a book signer available next door, along with drinks. If you go out there, turn right, you're all invited. And perhaps we could just have one last round of applause for a very insightful and entertaining talk.